Welcome back to the nationally syndicated Price of Business Show. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business, and all of our business, to really keep track of what's going on in the media, to make sure we are getting the best information, and more importantly, know how to navigate the information in a manner that's responsible and not merely looking for ideas or content that endorses our views, and really challenge ourselves. And that's how this whole series began with Dr. David Dozer. He is a professor emeritus from at Cal State San Diego. Is that right? Or San Diego State? You got those. You got some that are Cal State, and you got some that are San Diego's. Yeah. You're San Diego State, which, by the way, of the Cal State system, is the most beautiful campus I've seen, and I've seen most of them. And really enjoy your work, professor there in the media, in the journalism space. And always enjoy our conversations. And although we come from a different position when it comes to ideology, we really do believe in the importance of free speech. And you brought up a very interesting topic that I've been looking forward to for us to discuss. And before we get into it, just take a moment to talk about your publishing, your phenomenal book, and which is a really important one for the reader. Talk about that and how people can learn more about that. And welcome.
Well, thank you for having me on the program once again, Kevin. My book is called The California Killing Field, and it takes a kind of a deep, hard look at the death penalty in California and how attitudes towards the death penalty have evolved, but it's certainly a contested space. And much of the content deals with the ways in which politicians are able to manipulate media content in order to have a particular narrative favored, and that's exactly what happens in the novel, California Killing Field. And you can find more information about me in it at www.daviddozierbooks.com. And David Dozier Books is spelled the last name Dozier.
There you go. Make sure you check it out. Very good book. Always enjoy my conversations with you. Very interesting topic today. It's actually one that kind of gives me hope for journalism. Why don't you go ahead and set the stage for us?
Yeah, glad to. And it was spurred by a story on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. When I say front page, I actually get the paper version of the LA Times. And it was a story about some of the scandals at the University of Southern California, which has a long history of one scandal after another. This one involved the head of health, a doctor, having drug parties with students and using dangerous drugs, methamphetamine, for example. And one of the participants died of an overdose, and USC, in typical style, tried to cover up. What was important about it, though, was that there were two editors at the LA Times, for reasons best known to them, decided that they wanted to kind of keep that all hush-hush as well. And so two investigative reporters for the LA Times actually went out and did their reporting without the permission of these editors. They were doing basically a clandestine investigative piece and looking for an opportunity to get it published. And so anyhow, the thing that's valuable about it is that the LA Times did a front page story. This is what we did. Those two editors are no longer with us. And you have, as our readers, you have a right to know that in this particular place, the LA Times did not perform as watchdog for ordinary citizens, and it didn't do a good job of holding USC accountable for some of their shenanigans. And so it was a very interesting mea culpa from the newspaper. And I think, as a former journalist, and Kevin, I suspect you may agree with me, that when we as journalists hold other institutions to standards of transparency and accountability, so should the news media. And who else is going to do it? You've got to take that investigative eyeball and point it inward. Take a look at what's going on with your organization and how that contributes to good and not so good journalism.
Yeah, and this isn't that uncommon. Shady journalism taking place like this. Didn't the Washington Post have a writer get a Pulitzer Prize for a writer for a story about a person that was purely fictional, but of course it was treated as though it was nonfiction? This is a long ago story, but man, it shook the world of journalism.
As well it should, because we as journalists hold other organizations and other institutions accountable. We expect them to be transparent. We expect them to operate in an ethical fashion. And if you're going to expect other people to behave like that, then, the old golden rule, you should do it to yourself. You should be transparent about your own internal operations and hold yourself accountable for journalism that doesn't meet the standards that these publications purport to adhere to.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk about this. What do you think? How do you see this unfolding? I read the story. I liked the story. I was really heartened by the story. I kind of wish they would have gone into more depth of the mechanics behind it and how things came to the top. But there are, of course, limits. But what was your thoughts about the story itself on basically falling on the sword, and in this case, appropriately?
Well, I think that it's like most things, if you want to have consistent and ongoing coverage of a particular issue or topic area, you make it somebody's responsibility. You make it a regular beat. And it wouldn't necessarily be limited to your publication. I think you hold all of the media in your market, your competitors, accountable to those same standards. But you have journalists, depending on the size of the publication, it might be one person doing this, part of other responsibilities. But the idea that your job is to make sure that we're doing a good job as a newspaper or a TV station or a radio station as a provider of news. And have we done a good job? And if we haven't, let's talk about it. And there's an interesting thing that comes with that. I think when people see you willing to basically air your dirty laundry in public, I think that actually is going to enhance the credibility of the publication. As a publication, you take your responsibilities so seriously that you're even willing to, report some negative things about your own publication or your own organization in the spirit of we want to do a better job. And when we don't do a good job, we need to hold ourselves accountable because, let's be honest, who else is going to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally concur that any publication, really there's a certain amount of humility in that, and there's honesty in that, and there's certainly shunning hypocrisy because they're all publications claim to be in the accountability business. How can they be good at that business if they're not holding themselves accountable? And I think there should be more in this space. Do you know if there any publications have beat reporters like this? I mean, there are obviously media beats. I know that from people I've interviewed from the Washington Post and from the New York Times and other publications. But where the focus is on accuracy and not just accuracy, but making sure best practices are happening across the board. I'm not really familiar with that.
I don't know of any instance where it is routinized as a regular beat. Now, hopefully, some of your listeners will correct us on that. I haven't done an exhaustive study, but it just happens so rarely, and it pops up when it does. Is that leads me to believe that it's not happening much because we see these kinds of stories so infrequently. In my earlier communication with you, Kevin, I mentioned that in 2004, the New York Times basically did a mea culpa on their coverage of the run-up to the invasion of Iraq, where they said, we mostly took our information from the Pentagon and we weren't very critical. So 2004, 2022 what happened in between? I'm sure there are some instances, but
by the way, the story I mentioned earlier was 1981.
Right. See, we're not getting a lot of
gaps here.
And, as journalists, we could say, well, it's just because we do such a good job that there's hardly any need for this. But if we're being honest, we know that that's not true. There are lots of instances where organizations' first response is, well, let's just not tell anybody. I worked for a university for 37 years where they really like to do that. First response, well, let's just make sure the public, let's make sure this doesn't get out in the media. Well, yeah, shouldn't get out in the media. It shouldn't have happened. And that kind of transparency is what the media demands of all other institutions and organizations, and they should demand it of themselves. And that would be good in journalism.
That would be very good in journalism. Talk to me a little bit about, in fact, I'm sitting there trying to think. About the only thing that's close to this are academic institutions that try to monitor this type of thing.
Right.
But even that is only part of a larger journalism, focus. And nonprofit organizations, so-called think tanks, maybe like, there's some on the left and some on the right. And that's part of the problem, right? The ones on the left that really only keep an eye on the ones on the right, and the ones on the right only keep an eye on the ones on the left, which undermines the overall credibility of those efforts.
Right. And when we start talking about think tanks and academics, one of the difficulties, and I'm guilty of this as anybody else, is you're rewarded for talking to other academics. And so it's just kind of this little circle of people using, highly specialized jargon to talk to each other. And it's not terribly accessible. So, yes, there are organizations that monitor journalistic performance and look at not just in the U.S. but globally. But they talk to themselves. And I think what has to happen is a dialogue with, your readers and your viewers and your listeners. That's who has a right to know this stuff, and they should be able to get it the same place they get the news that they typically follow. So if I, read the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, and they basically come out with a story that says, you know what, we screwed up. We really screwed up on this, and here's how it happened, and here are the details, and here's what we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. When I read that, I go, that is a quality publication, or that's a quality news organization, because they're applying the same standards of transparency and accountability to themselves that they apply to other organizations and institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for many years, I was part of the tribal hard right for many, many years. And I used to mock the New York Times because, let's face it, you don't go more than 2 or 3 days without a correction in the New York Times. And it just doesn't happen. And I used to mock them for their inaccuracy, but over time, and of course the scandalous story is on page 1, the correction is much further back. Yeah, I get all that. But you know what? Who else is monitoring themselves on a regular basis making those corrections? I mean, that to me is a sign of integrity. That's a sign of commitment to best practices. And so, I've had to repent publicly often for that criticism. I'd love to see that happen because, let's face it, we're all human. And that includes these institutions being made up of humans, which means that mistakes and poor judgments are kind of ubiquitous.
Yeah, well, I think that the key thing here is that you're in a fishbowl if you're working in media, news media, and as a result, you just need to be transparent and accountable. You can't, it's rank hypocrisy to say, oh, USC, you have. And, you have doctors partying with drug addicts and one of them died, shame on you. And then at the same time, you're suppressing that same story because and I don't know what the connections were between the editors and USC. I do know that USC has an enormously large footprint in the greater Los Angeles area, and it's, something of a sacred cow. But I would still assume that the LA Times would find a story about that kind of high-level corruption a very, very interesting story. And the idea that the two editors were responsible for frustrating the effort to cover that story was wrong. And I think it showed a lot of courage of the LA Times to come out and say, yeah, that was wrong. We shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, and you factor in, I'm sure they have a massive alumni association. I'm sure a lot of alumni are business owners that have advertising going to, the LA Times. I would mean, come on, that's just like logical, right?
Yeah,
There's, and we've talked about this before. It's kind of that awkward, we really appreciate your advertising, but you did this, and we have to report it. That's an awkwardness that I've talked about, but unfortunately, that's required if you're going to have integrity in journalism. Another great topic. Really found this one very interesting. Props to the LA Times for doing the right thing. I would love to see that happen more often. In future conversations, we might want to explore things that, what would a beat like we've been talking about look like? I think we do need more of this kind of accountability. Running out of time. Final thoughts on your part, David?
Well, I just once again want to say how much I enjoy the work that you and I are able to do by bringing issues of relevance to the news business and ways in which we try to make people who consume the news a little bit more literate about what's going on in the business.
I agree. It's one of my favorite things. I look forward to this every month. And any regular listener of the show knows most of our segments are 10 or maybe 15 minutes long. We go deep because these subjects are deep and they have a profound impact. And media stories, both at priceofbusiness.com and most of our media stories is at our sister site, thedailyblaze.com. This is a big part of the heart of what we're working on. And so thanks as always, David. I'm Kevin Price. This is The Price of Business. Stay tuned for more.